This is Changeling the podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the podcast. Come for the glamour, stay for the vibes. I'm your host Josh, and with us is your other host Pooka. Say hi, Pooka.
Hi, Pooka.
What are we doing today, Pooka?
The same thing we do every week, Josh. Sorry, I've been waiting to do that.
Actually, we're not, because we're not exact. Are we talking about a Changeling book?
Well, that is a good point. This is a little bit different, and I think this will turn out to be what we might refer to as a mini-sode.
We'll see how long this episode ends up being to know if it counts as that.
But to answer your question more properly, we'll be talking about Rage Against Appalachia, which is referred to as a regional sourcebook for Werewolf the Apocalypse and Changeling the Dreaming, but more the former than the latter.
But it definitely is a source book for Changeling the Dreaming, I would say.
For sure.
There are pieces that are certainly source material for Changeling.
Yeah.
So yeah, we wanted to give a bit of a disclaimer?
Disclaimer, yeah.
Yeah. We're two white people talking about Indigenous issues and things like that. We're doing our best, but...
We're attempting to handle this with as much sensitivity as we are able.
Yeah. Maybe we should not be treated as experts in the subject, is probably the best way of saying it.
Yeah.
So yeah, we are looking at the Changeling portions of this book, not giving it the full werewolf side, because it's not really relevant to the podcast.
But please go listen to Werewolf, the podcast run by Josh Heath for more information about the werewolf material.
Yes, friend of the show, Josh Heath. So yeah, there's multiple chapters in this book, like many books, but we'll be starting, I believe, on chapter 2.
Aside from the introduction, though, yes, there's chapter 2.
Yes. So this is on the geography of Appalachia, but it's going through the specific Changeling parts. Those seem to do at least not just doing what you could do in Wikipedia now, or is it more like that for the rest of the chapter?
Well, a lot of it is information that you could find elsewhere. Some of it is, or a good deal of it really, is structured around the various septs and werewolf packs that occupy the area. So, sites of importance to the Garou. But then there are a couple pages at the end where they talk about sites that are important to the Fae for various reasons.
Yes. So I know there was Mount Mitchell.
Mm-hmm.
And what were the other areas, would you say, that are worth mentioning?
Well, so Mount Mitchell is part of the county of Balsam, which is the freehold of Countess... It's Teresa, but spelled all Irish-like, so Teresa. Lady of the Black Dome, and they go into more detail in chapter 4 when they give the actual stats for all the characters and stuff. But basically, she's the most awful Fiona ever. Apologies to any House Fiona fans who are listening, but she is just the worst expression of House Fiona.
I'd say more, I'm not as much a fan as Fiona. It's more of the she I end up going, hey, I like them. There's a good chance it's Fiona. But this is an example of not a great one.
Every once in a while, a not-so-great Fiona slips through the cracks.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have Roan Mountain, where there's an unseelie motley who plays bluegrass at local festivals. I do feel a little bit charmed by reading that because, as a kid, I will tell an anecdote. I used to go to the Pennsylvania Renaissance Fair every year, and there was a band there called Arcona Reel Band that was sort of Appalachian Celtic folk bluegrass mishmash people. And I was one of those kids who loved showing up to the Pennsylvania Renaissance Fair and listening to 8 people playing dulcimers for an hour. So I like that. I'd like to think that the author, which is Jackie Casada in this case, who, as we've discussed before, hailed from the region and so had a deep affection for it, that was the kind of band and energy that she was trying to capture with having that kind of group be a changeling motley.
Oh, that is awesome. Yeah, I have my own childhood bluegrass connection things, but that's very different from... I'm not from that region at all, but just through my grandfather and stuff. He was really into that, so...
That still counts, I'd say.
Yeah.
Then we have Highcastle, Eyrie, which we've already looked at in Freeholds and Hidden Glens. These are some crafty types who hide out deep in the wilderness of Appalachia. It's a runaway she and her lover and a couple associates, and they go around the local markets selling stuff. And then Chimney Tops, which is a group of Nunnehi hidden in the mountains who have made overtures to the Garou about joining forces.
Yes. That group had an interesting little comment talking about they have knowledge exchange with shamans, and it was unclear who they were talking about, but it's definitely showing that according to this book, at least the Nunnehi are. Sometimes it can feel like, oh, they're disconnected from all mortals, but no, it seems like they are tied to at least people within the same cultural group, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's a little bit, well, we can get into a chapter 4. There's more about that I want to say.
Yeah, and there's another interesting bit on just our ongoing discussion of changelings in the spirit worlds. Early in this chapter, it also says that fairies count as spirits, but it also says monsters do. So I think this is evidence, really, that vampires count as spirits.
Oh no. Does that mean we can affect vampires with Spirit Sphere?
That's a question for Mage the podcast.
Noted. One other thing in this chapter, which I feel like was something that almost happened but then didn't, and I'm really pissed that it didn't, is in the background behind the text, we get line drawings of the Changeling stained glass icons for 2 of the freeholds. And one has like a cloud with rain falling, and one has a harp, I think. And it just makes me think, was there the idea at some point to have a system of heraldry in the game where each freehold kind of got its own emblem? Because that would have been so cool, and I'm really mad if that didn't happen.
Oh, that would have been. I mean, we can make it a thing with our own freeholds, but yes, that'd have been a lot of art.
It would have been, but still,
Yeah.
it would have been so cool. And if that was intended.
There was one other bit on the Nunnehi in this chapter that stood out to me. Was it said on Mount Mitchell that the Kithane and the Nunnehi in that area have a exchange of fosterlings, which seems like if it became more of a thing would be very relevant to the setting. But
yeah. But that's all we get for the actual fairy sites in the region, and it's 2 pages out of a chapter of like 20 pages. So again, the book is more werewolf heavy than changeling heavy. But then chapter 4 is entirely devoted to the Fae, which is nice.
Yeah, the Mountain Dreamers.
What were your thoughts on chapter 4?
I liked it better than I expected I would.
I'll accept that.
I'm not saying there were no problems, but there were fewer problems and more things I liked than I expected.
Which things in particular did you find appealing, I suppose? Well, we should probably talk about what was in it first, maybe.
Yes. So yeah, we get a bunch of things. We get the history of the Fae in the region, Kithane and Nunnehi, and hints of others. Some of the stuff in the history, I mean, we've gone over the history before of Concordia in general, but it did mention what I think were lost ones, but hiding in glens. But this would have been like part of that whole pre-Columbian Kithane traveling to North America thing, or the Americas.
Which
it was a little bit not only problematic, but also like confusing in how to fit it into anything else in Changeling.
Yeah, it's one of those pieces of, I suppose, canon lore that I tend to just elide from thinking about, because it doesn't really seem to serve much purpose, except if you really, for some reason, want to have European Kithane lost one glen buried in the wilderness of Appalachia for some reason. I suppose you can, but creating a whole narrative that pairs with this sort of pseudo-history that's been used for problematic things just feels really awkward.
At least this time they didn't travel with the humans at all, and they weren't changelings.
Small steps.
Yes. Also mentioned something when it's talking about the moon landing parts. It was the rare merger of human science and inspiration. This chapter in general went pretty hard on the, maybe even more than the core book, first edition core book, on the science is banal side of things. Which, given it's also a werewolf book, kind of makes sense to me.
Yeah.
if you try to relate banality and glamour in werewolf terms, that you're definitely going to fall down that road. Oh, and it says the Get Offenders get along with the trolls in this book.
I think they've always been more or less okay with the trolls. It's just the she they
it's just the she that rode them around like dogs, or like horses or something. Yes, okay.
Wolfy horses.
But yeah, I believe this is the introduction to the Nunnehi, like as to actual rules and details.
Yes, we finally get mechanics.
Yes. Which now it makes a little bit more sense why they... I didn't realize it started here. This makes a little bit more sense why they have all that Umbra stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I like it, but I can see how you get there.
I want to clarify something really important because I've seen it come up again and again in discussions about the Nunnehi online, which is
Hmm.
there's this misconception people seem to have that the Nunnehi, because in the game they are described as severed from the dreaming, even though they have this connection with the Umbra to make up for it. Because of that, people seem to think, oh, that means they can't get glamour from dreamers by musing
Yeah,
them. And it's very, very clearly stated that they can. It is, however, more difficult for them when trying to muse someone not from the culture that they hail from.
a little bit more than that. It also depends on the cultural activity of the person they're musing.
Yes, yes. But regardless of whether you think that part, the increased difficulty, is acceptable or not in the game, it is very clear that yes, they can get glamour from humans.
Hmm.
There are extensive rules about how they gain glamour from nature, probably in part because this is the first time in the game where we get rules for how to gain glamour from nature. So they had to be presented more extensively.
Yes. The other thing is that I've seen in discussions of this online and whatnot, it's not saying that the Nunnehi always had that. The
Right,
umbral
yeah.
connection, the different ways of gaining glamour and whatnot are presented as something happening as a consequence of colonialism.
Yeah. Since they're shattering.
Yeah, like I could, if you tweaked this slightly to the Kithane came and took over the Trods, so the Nuni had limited access, it suddenly would make a lot more sense. Although that's not really what it presents.
Yeah, I'm just going to say that, you know, there were no pre Columbian transoceanic she. It's
Oh, I'm not even
just.
talking about that. It's no, this is the actual post-Columbian
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay.
transoceanic
Yeah.
commoners
Okay. Yeah.
is what caused the problem. But so yeah, there's implications like, well, what does it mean you're cut off from the Umbra? Because this book also does say they can enter the dreaming through the Umbra.
Right.
It's just difficult because the Umbras can be difficult. So if like some Kithane opens a Trod and says, "Hey, my Nunnehi friend, come on through," like what happens? I'm unclear.
I'd assume they can go through a trod with someone else. But I believe for them stepping sideways is equivalent to opening a trod in that it takes Wayfair and Fey of the same levels.
Yes,
That is in there.
it must be in their element, but
Right. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So it's actually a really hard way to get into the Umbra. I'd say it's easier than getting into the dreaming, but harder than a werewolf getting into the Umbra.
Those werewolves, they trip and they fall into the umbra.
Yeah, what did they do before pocket mirrors were a thing? But
Bodies of water? Puddles?
that's true. There's less of those anyway. There's two other comments talking about changelings can muse the Nunnehi, other like Kithane and whatnot, which is what? Can changelings muse changelings? Like Kithane can muse Kithane? And the other question of a different kind of, I'm not sure what to think about this. It's the first talk of white issue,
Yes.
which, yes, anyway.
Raises questions.
Yeah. And by saying I'm not sure to talk about that, I'm really actually not sure what to think about that. Not, I automatically think it's bad or whatever, but
Well, and later on we do get, you know, Lord Dice, but
yeah.
we can only tackle so many problematic topics in one episode, so
Yes. Just thought I'd mention it's in there. It's the first time I
yeah.
saw it in Changeling books.
I believe that issue is also kind of presented as ethnically ambiguous. I don't know, but yeah, he's
Oh.
described as kind of looking different every time people meet him.
Hmm.
He's more of a proto Pisky in a sense than a
Yeah.
proto C20 Pisky.
Wandering storytellers going on adventures and maybe a little bit of trickster bench. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Anyway, after that, we do get three of the families of the Nunnehi, which are the Nunnehi, the Yunwei and the Yumeyamehinehi, who are all, as far as I'm aware, drawn from Cherokee folklore. I do have links that I want to post in the show notes about how I learned more about these figures from folklore, so I will do that. And they also appear later in the player's guide along with the other, I believe, 10 families in that book. But these are ones, again, local to Appalachia, as is the term Nunnehi. So it almost seems like, I almost wonder if Nunnehi was meant to be a local term first and then just got extended to mean all indigenous Fae in Concordia. But
I think it actually says that in this chapter. Like, this is the term for them here.
There are some little bits of mechanical information. They get an additional success when they use primal. Their freeholds are called townships or encampments, and it's a difficulty +1 for anyone trying to use banality to overcome those places. Which I'm not entirely sure what that means, but I guess that's good.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about their courts?
Yes. Well, instead of courts, they have camps. There's rock, dogwood, and laurel, which are also called winter, summer, and mid-season. They're not exactly equivalent to unseelie, seelie, and in between, but they sort of function in the same way of the Nunnehi having a legacy of each type and kind of switching back and forth between them.
Mm-hmm.
And they get totems, which are similar to werewolf totems in that they are spirits that the Nunnehi feels an affiliation with. It gives them some kind of mechanical benefit, but unlike werewolf totems, they are not pack totems. They are for the individual and therefore are cheaper in background points.
Yes. And also, they specify the totems would appear differently for them than a totem would for a werewolf pack. Like, even if it was nominally the same spirit. I didn't really understand the werewolf aspect. That's something about, like, when you have a pack totem, it's not really the spirit that you have the pack totem of, but like one of their subordinates, I think it was saying. Or
I'm going to throw a bit of shade and suggest that it might be the Nunnehi have a more direct and honest connection with the spirit, whereas the werewolves tend to see it through the lens of how they want to see it.
Yeah.
In their mission to preserve Gaia.
Yeah, it also said that the choice of typical choices of Geru and the typical choices of Nunnehi also, they'll often pick different spirits.
Yeah.
Because to do that crossing into the Umbra thing for a Nunnehi, the element has to match what you picked. So it's like, well, if you picked a wolf totem, you'd have to open up a portal on a wolf, and that could be a problem. So they'll pick things like plants that grow in the area or something.
Right. They tend to be more inanimate than the werewolf ones. I think
Mm-hmm.
pick is also a strong term here. It's more
Well,
of
it
a...
seemed like a conscious choice on what totem to choose for the Nunnehi.
I think it's more they come to realize what is significant to them and then sort of decide to make that connection, if I was reading it.
Okay. Yeah, another pointing out a problematic element said that Nunnehi have to have a tribal membership, which I'm not sure how the politics work in the US, but saying that in Canada that's a problem.
Well, so I will say in the US, there's the narrative of people kind of claiming distant ancestry of one indigenous
Yes.
group and using that as an excuse to, for example, be really racist. And so, I wonder to what degree that played into the thought process for putting that in there. But
Yeah. And definitely if you're just talking about Appalachia, it means something different. Because I know here
yeah,
it's there's some self-determination laws just being passed. They get around this, but there's a lot of federally mandated rules as to who counts as what.
yeah. I mean, I have faith that with this book, there's a lot of sensitivity to the culture of Appalachia that
Yeah.
I'm not aware of, and that probably for space reasons or whatever else, they didn't go into in depth in a way that would have contextualized it.
This is making way more sense now. You take a book well done for Appalachia, at least assuming it's what we're assuming. Again, the same disclaimer said at the beginning of the episode, right? But let's assume it's well done for Appalachia.
Yeah. Neither of us is from Appalachia. So
Yes, let alone.
I have driven through it, but
Yes. We were talking before we started recording. I'm never actually sure if I've been in it or not, but that's
you would know. You would know.
yeah. Then probably not.
Beautiful. It's very beautiful.
I've been on interstates. That's most of what I've been in the U.S. But yeah, so you take this good thing for Appalachia, and then with less care, it's extended to the entire territory covered by Canada, the continent, most of the U.S. and Mexico. You can get. I could definitely see where those problems came from there.
Yeah, for sure. In any case,
But
the rules that are in
we'll be
here,
having more discussions of Nunnehi in general later in more episodes.
and especially when we get to the player's guide, where a lot of these rules get expanded and developed much further.
Yeah.
But after all that, we have a bunch of changelings.
Yeah. I have one more question that came up from this. That's just like a rule thing. It talks about you must use Fey 1 or Fey 2 to bring others.
Yes, I did notice that.
And I'm like, who is that for?
Right. So apparently the distinction between Kithane and Gallane doesn't matter.
Or maybe it does, and there's noble Nunnehi.
So yeah, to step sideways, it says the Nunnehi can bring other changelings into the Umbra with him. He must have the Fey realm of the appropriate level, 1 for commoners, 2 for nobles, and spend 1 glamour point for every person brought over. All those stepping sideways must hold hands.
Yeah.
So if changeling includes Kithane, that's interesting because it implies that the Kithane Gallian distinction doesn't matter, just the common or noble distinction for affecting others. If it's only meant to refer to other Nunnehi, then yes, it implies there are noble Nunnehi. So either way,
Or it implies Nunnehi are Fey for to affect themselves.
I don't think that would be the likely reading, but
Yeah.
I don't think that's what they meant, but perhaps.
Yes. Yeah. And there was also part of the character creation section. This was another like I'm saying this is better than I expected, but there's still some things. It says Nunnehi aren't supposed to generally take streetwise, drive, computer, or science. That I found to be the most offensive part of this chapter.
I think part of that, again, is more to do with the Appalachian piece. Well, in part, because there is the Appalachian piece, which is I can understand them saying streetwise doesn't make a lot of sense if you're living high up on a mountain in the woods. But then the
Yeah,
other
but there's
part
Kithane in
is
this book too. Like you
right,
could play Kith. This is meant for Kithane PCs as well for
right.
Appalachia.
But so the other part that I had a problem with is that to some extent the Nunnehi are presented as kind of staying away from mortals and secluding themselves. And that doesn't make a lot of sense to me because I would imagine they would very much want to keep in contact with people in their culture who are human and
Yes.
inspire them, etc. So to have them just kind of be reclusive nature spirits, that that really only works from a werewolf perspective for me.
Yeah.
And making them sort of changelings, in the full sense of the word, and having them have a human side equivalent to the Kithane.
Yeah.
They might grow up in town where they learn to drive or had science class. I would like that depiction more, and I think that they have over the editions moved closer to that, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there is also that sort of reputation Appalachia has of being poor schools and poor roads and all of that. So
Yeah. But drive that I don't understand.
I
Maybe
mean,
I'm really missing a part of Appalachia. I thought,
not everyone has a car.
yeah. But anyway, yeah.
Hmm.
Getting on to the other characters.
Yes, we have a passel of Appalachian changelings, starting with Countess Teresa, the worst Fiona ever.
Mm-hmm.
She's
I don't know.
just
There were some bad Fionas in other books we've done so
she's just like Mean Girls Fiona, that's all.
far. Mm.
The money quote is, "You are the picture of charm and gaiety. Laugh, smile, and do your best to make the people around you feel that they are as good as you are. They aren't, but they shouldn't suffer for it. Or suffer because of it." She's just the worst.
Let us know in the Discord, which we have a link to in the show notes on our website, if you want us to do an episode of the top 10 worst Fiona in Changeling the Dreaming.
Then we have the aforementioned issue.
When I was talking about the issue earlier, like it wasn't just this one character. I was talking about it mentioned a bunch of issue or like that.
Yeah, one of the aforementioned issue.
Yeah.
Then we have a wolf Pooka who's masquerading as a silver fang,
Yep.
and a red cap biker girl, and a few Nunnehi. So we have Nunnehi with stats for the first time.
Yes. And character creation rules. So it's...
I think that the Nunnehi characters presented here, I'm glad they're here because finally we get more depth than just Nunnehi warbands have been seen on the edges
Mm-hmm.
of the county or whatever.
Yep.
They still feel pretty stereotypical to me, but
Yeah. The leader guy felt like a leader guy in a lot of could be in the same personality and similar dilemmas in a lot of changeling games for a lot of groups, at
yeah.
least. It's like, okay, you have this conflict that's complicated and you have to deal with the people who don't want to be moderate about it and want to like go fight, and other people who are like, no, not so much, and then you're trying to bounce that just that's not a steer. That's just like a trope of leadership in a game, I think, or setting, right, where there's strife but not war.
Yeah, but
Um,
it's that combined with sort of the trope of the wise chief who wants peace, you know?
hmm,
And that's, I mean, again, by comparison with nameless descriptions of raiding parties just kind of popping up, that's good. But at the same time, I would have wanted to hear more about like his human side or
that's
what he
true.
does in his off hours, you know?
He is essentially a low King David on a smaller scale.
Yes.
So I mean, it's not like we got off hours for King David either, but that's not saying it's good. But
Yeah. I mean, King David, for as much as he pops up, you know, Kingdom of Willows is really the only time we get any kind of personal information about him. So
yeah,
the rest of the time is he's just King David.
yeah. And there was another character named Foot Stomper here. There was a line about him I found confusing with what we were talking about earlier. It talks about where he grew up in the town, like the village or something. I can't remember what the exact term is, but it made it seem like he's with like a bunch of mortals, but he hates mortals and doesn't want anything to do with them unless he's like living in like a large community of Nunnehi, like large to the point where it would feel weird talking about that many kithane. Unless he meant mortals, they should have said like white mortals, maybe. It was strange.
I'm, I mean, I'm looking at his description and I'm not sure. It says occasionally he ventures into a town and wreaks havoc on storefront windows with his well placed missiles. Currently, he's trying to get more of his tribe to join him. But
Yeah.
but that's all the changelings we get. So 6 total, and a whole bunch of werewolves before that. I do like just onto the next page. I mean, the rest of the book really doesn't have anything to do with Changeling, but if you turn the page, you get the start of chapter 5, which has a group called the Black Spiral Square Dancers, which is just priceless. So,
I missed that. That is amazing.
anyone running a werewolf game, please include that in your next session.
I never realized just, there's like so many dancing puns you could make about that tribe.
Absolutely. Anyway, there is an appendix that has a little bit more. We get some of the Nunnehi totems. And I really like the note about ballads because the traditional folk ballads are really important, in my understanding, to Appalachian musical culture. And there's reference to how those songs are used to kind of pass on bits of wisdom, bits of history, and potentially in a changeling game, bits of important lore that characters might want to know. So it's a nice tool to sort of slip plot hooks in or slip information in that's appropriate for the setting. And that's basically it.
Yeah. And I do think like the spirit, like they had some werewolf rules for gifts from them, but yeah, the rest of it, you could take this book, not have werewolf, never read werewolf, and assuming you only cared about the parts we're talking about, fully use them in a game, I think.
For sure. So, what were your thoughts overall about the material?
Yeah, like I was saying, it explains a lot about the Nunnehi, like
Yeah,
where they came from as a concept. Like it works better here, I thought, than other descriptions I've read of them in Changeling. There's still problems, but not quite as much.
maybe the main problem comes back to the fact that they started as an accessory to another game line and then were spun into a central playable part of Changeling without getting kind of the needed depth
Yeah,
to kind of break them out a little bit from their original conception. It's been a while since I've read the original player's guide, so I'm going to have to go back and see how in depth that truly did get by comparison. But from my recollection, it wasn't much more than this. I mean, I think the rules are pretty much identical, and
yeah, and
yeah,
the cultural aspects too. Like we were saying, like it works. Maybe it works for Appalachia, and you're saying from your knowledge of it, it seems to for you, or at least better.
I can understand why it's in there. I'll put it like
Yeah,
that.
but like you extend that, like for the cultures I'm more familiar with, it makes less sense,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
especially once you're getting to like the far north of Canada.
for
Like
sure. Yeah.
none of this works for Inuit. Like they shouldn't even be Nunnehi in my mind, like the same group. But
Yeah. Yeah, part of it is really the geography, I think, where it is a place that you could presumably just hole up with your family generation after generation and never leave because you have everything you need. You don't have any need to really go down the mountain, go down the river, you know? So there's that element. It does also present sort of I guess the most obvious point of connection between werewolf and changeling, with the defensive nature and the resistance to sort of human intrusion into it, which has a
Yeah,
very different expression if you're dealing with Kithane or dealing with Nunnehi, and also a different
but it's
expression.
it's there for both.
Yeah,
Groups care about that in this game.
right. And of course, things like Pentex is awful to humans overall, so all changelings should be against them, especially because
Hmm.
they have Fomori, who might be Fomorians. We're not really sure.
Yeah, I think the technocracy should be against them. Like that's it's not a disliking that group. Like I could see like half the Thalane hating them.
Well, but this isn't a mage book, so
I mean, half the Thalane also like of Changeling, like going, I don't like you
yeah,
guys. So
yeah. And there are other hooks too. I mean, werewolves and changelings both have the epic story connection, which the ballad aspect also
mhm.
kind of connects to the notion of defending tradition.
Yeah,
But I guess that's it for Rage Across Appalachia.
yeah. It's the first book that turned the Nunnehi into actually people that you could play, and not early Sabat gonna attack you kind
Mm.
of thing.
Small steps, small steps.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, that's this is Changeling the Podcast. You can find us at changelingthepodcast.com. We have a Facebook group for Changeling the Podcast. We have a Twitter. What's the Twitter?
Changeling Cast, or at Changeling Cast.
You can email us at podcast@changelingthepodcast.com. And we have a Discord that doesn't have a nice little link, so you can check that on our website or in the show notes.
The link is included at the bottom of each show notes after the mysterious quotes and biographies that are included each time.
So until next time,
Dream safe.
dream safe.